Thank you so much for attending my presentation on the worst legendary and singles Pokemon, and first let's actually talk about the Pokemon that didn't quite make it. I decided to disqualify Cosmog, Cosmoem, Type, Null, and Calyrex, who would all be worse, but are in essence precursors to more powerful legendaries. If you count them, that's fine, then consider this to be a video about the fourth worst instead. Some of the first Pokemon I looked at were Regirock and Regice, who have been nearly unusable in every recent gen. What kept them out of the bottom spot was their solid roles in Gen 3 overused, and even afterwards they didn't do downright terrible until X and Y. Wo-Chien was introduced this generation but has a really sad resume, being in PU. Even worse is that the other Treasures of Ruin are all extremely strong, with 2 being banned from overused. Regigigas is notoriously bad, and my decision to choose Silvally is honestly just how I looked at the question. Silvally's peaks are absolutely higher, but the vast majority of forms are terrible even down in ZU. Regigigas is also in ZU currently, but has had some roles before, most notably in DPP UU as a defensive backbone. It also sees usage in Hackmons due to its fantastic stats, although counting those is admittedly a bit more fringe. As I mentioned earlier, my pick for the worst legendary Pokemon in singles is Silvally, but what does it have? Silvally's stats are 95 across the board, which is decidedly they're better than like Gliggly, but when it comes to flat stats, 95 is pretty low behind Celebi and Jirachi. Thankfully, it gets a lot of strong offensive tools. If you like coverage, this is the guy for you, having almost every option you could ever want. These don't hit super hard coming off of its aforementioned 95 attacking stats, but it can deal some real damage if given the chance. But the most famous part of Silvally's design are its memories. These are items similar to plates, and when held by a Silvally, its type will change to match it. In addition, it gets access to a judgment-like move called multi-attack. This has a really high 120 base power, and since it always has stab, this deals a lot of damage to say the least. All this sounds pretty good. Obviously not OU material, but Silvally could probably have a place in like rarely used or something, right? Unfortunately, those stats really hurt. 95 is almost usable. Without losing speed, Silvally struggles to pick up Okos even when hitting for super effective damage. For example, common ZU threat Tangela isn't even 2-hit KO by Silvally Fire's multi-attack without an adamant nature, and even then it's still only about a 50% chance. 95 defenses have become more and more obsolete as well, especially for a Pokemon released in Sun and Moons as 2 generations ago. It can take some attacks, but without a recovery move, it struggles badly to switch in more than twice. But where it hurts the most is in speed. 95 is so close to the all-important base 100 benchmark, as being above that number can and has made Pokemon much better than they would be otherwise. Compounding this issue, every single form aside from normal cannot run an item, forcing them to deal with these middling stats. Silvally is interesting in concept, but Game Freak didn't give it the tools to succeed in any kind of high-powered metagame. You guessed it, Silvally has never been that good. Only 5 of the 18 forms are above ZU, even in the limited decks of Gen 8. There's a few that have done okay, specifically the ground type managed to reach never use, but everything else is rotting away. The bad types are worthless. These Pokemon are categorically worse than garbage like Crustle, no offense to Crustle fans. This begs the question, why, if some of its forms are okay, did I put it below Regigigas, who a lot of people would consider to be worse? I briefly touched on this earlier, but I personally think Silvally is worse largely because of how many awful Pokemon were put into the bottom tiers because of its existence. Regigigas is one guy, but there's a ton of Silvally forms clogging the team builder, the majority of which aren't even that good. However, I do get why some people would put Regigigas lower. It's dependent on how exactly you define the quote-unquote worst. In conclusion, while the idea behind Silvally is a bit interesting, being an Arceus remake, there just isn't enough there. It's floundered in the low tier since inception and honestly doesn't look to be getting any better. Thank you so much for watching.